Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. We had Celtics and Lakers part two last night as the two historic teams renewed their rivalry for the second time in, I think, as many weeks, Sap, right? Like they played, I think, what was it, a week ago, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah,
And
2 weeks
yeah, two
for
weeks
the
ago.
don't see them. Usually they would meet in February, like right around the All-Star break, right before or after the All-Star break, and that was always kind of a fun game in LA. But they got them out of the way before they even changed the name of StaplesCentro.com Arena.
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed that they kind of got it out of the way so early. It's always a fun game to look forward to later in the season too, but it is what it is. The schedule makers decided we'll put these two games close together, and ultimately, for I think it's the sixth season in a row, Sap, they split their series as the Lakers win last night. Really, they trounced the Celtics last night, 117 to 102. What were your impressions from this game, Sap?
Well, I thought that was one of the best performances of the year by the Lakers. LeBron James looked really good. In fact, over the last 6 games, he's averaging 34 points per game. He's been efficient. He's even hitting his free throws, maybe limiting his attempts from three. I thought LeBron looked really, really good. Russell Westbrook, again, as I warn people, it's going to take time for him to adjust to the Lakers to adjust to him. I think he's been playing better as well. We saw that last year where he was much better in the second half of the year than the first half of the year with Washington, and the same thing the year before in Houston. It takes a little while to get used to playing with a player like that, and he has to kind of adapt a little bit to what you have. Anthony Davis, still not forcing his offense the way I'd like to see him. He should be the team's leading scorer pretty much every night. He wasn't, but he did a good job on the boards. And the key, the Lakers, scored 66 points in the paint, which they should do. They shouldn't take as many threes as they do. They're a big team. And one change that the Lakers have made recently is they're starting Anthony Davis at the 5, which I think makes a ton of sense. To put DeAndre Jordan out there to start a game is lunacy. Dwight Howard, you could put in there to certain spots against certain teams, because he can get in and get physical. But for the most part, when Anthony Davis is at the 5 and LeBron's at the 4, they're a tough matchup. I thought the Lakers looked really good last night. It was tough for the Celtics without Jaylen Brown, losing their second best player for so far has been about a week or so, maybe a little bit longer. They're playing shorthanded at that point, and they just weren't up to the task. Tatum, they really had difficulty really doing much on offense. So not a real surprise that the Lakers looked good. The Celtics didn't look all that good. Both of these teams are essentially 500 teams. I do think the Lakers ceiling is much higher because they have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, but there's still a bit of ways from really being in the same tier as the Warriors and the Suns out west.
Yeah, I think that it's certainly the best I've seen the Lakers look this season, which is, as a Celtics fan, obviously disappointing. You don't want a team to have their best game against you. And I feel like a lot of times teams look at the Celtics and go, oh, yeah, we can really get on this team. And the Lakers did that last night. The first half was very competitive. It was a 3-point game at halftime. And then the Lakers just really drummed the Celtics from there. From the Celtics standpoint, I thought they just had a lackadaisical effort, and they had a terrible game plan. The Lakers are old. I mean, that is not a surprise. And the Celtics decided to play half court basketball with them, which they do against virtually every team. If you want to beat the Lakers, a good way to start is to try to take advantage of their age and run the crap out of them. And the Celtics decided that they were going to play right into the Lakers' hands and constantly play half court and walk the ball up the court. And, giving those old legs on the Lakers plenty of times to set on defense and rest, that's just the exact wrong thing to do. So I find a lot of fault with that game plan. And also the Celtics got absolutely obliterated on the rebounding game. 51 rebounds to 34 last night. That is untenable. You can't win a game that way. So, and a lot of rebounding is effort too. So I think a lot of the game came down to effort, and I think the Lakers just looked at the Celtics and said, "Oh, this is a team that we don't fear at all, and that we're going to be able to do whatever we want against." And basically, the Lakers did that. I mean, for guys like Russell Westbrook, who've been struggling a lot this season, he looked like MVP Russell Westbrook. You don't want to see the team that's been struggling figure out their things against you and have that game be a turnaround game for them in the season. And that's what the Celtics were last night. So I was really disappointed with their effort. and their game plan. And I think, to on top of that, the extra kick in the balls is that it was against the Lakers, and maybe you helped right the Lakers ship a little bit because you did play so poorly.
Well, I think the Lakers have been playing better, in particular Russell Westbrook. He's playing better the last 2 or 3 weeks than he did the first, say, month and a half of the season. So he's been trending in the right direction. I think he's playing off the ball a little bit more. He and LeBron seem to be getting their chemistry down a little bit and playing off each other. So that's been happening for a few games. The Lakers play at a very fast pace. They're first or second in the league in pace. The problem is the Celtics don't play with pace on the offensive end. They have a tendency, like you said, to walk the ball up, let the opposing team set up their defense, and then next thing you know, it's ISO with Jason Tatum, and then you're at the mercy of Jason Tatum's going to be hot or not that night. And, he's been playing fine. He had 34 points last night, scored the first 14 points for the Celtics, which, he was just on fire. But, I mean, unless he was going to score 50 last night, they had no chance. I would like to see the Celtics play with more pace on offense. And I'm not saying they have to fast break necessarily. It's like get into their offense a little bit quicker and play with more force, get towards the basket and then kick it out to some open shooters. The only problem is without Jaylen Brown, you miss your second best player. That's a very difficult situation to overcome. So I think that was a problem. But when you get out rebounded 51-34 and the other team scores 66 points in the paint, it's going to be a tough night no matter what. And the Celtics are in the middle of this long trip. They got taken care of by Utah on the first game when Utah hit over 50% from three, bounced back with a nice win over Portland, although Portland didn't have Dame Lillard. And then you lose to the Lakers, and the very next night you got to play the Clippers in the same building, and then you end the thing with Phoenix. So it's a tough West Coast trip. And then when you come back, you're playing Milwaukee and Golden State. So it's a really, really difficult. You're playing a lot of really good teams, but that's been my issue with the Celtics offense this year is I don't think they play with enough pace. And that doesn't necessarily mean ending up in fast breaks, but getting into their offense quicker and with more force and getting in an offensive position more so that, okay, we've got 8 seconds left on the shot clock. Where's Jason Tatum? Let's see if he can bail us out. That's really not tenable for a long period of time.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I agree with it too. But I do feel like there does need to be more running in general and fast breaking. And I don't think they're a very good transition team. And the only reason they're not is because they don't look to score points in transition. They have the players to be able to get out and run transition. Outside of Al Horford, who's 48 years old, they have guys who are fast and athletic. I mean, Rob Williams is the perfect type of center for a transition team. He can run up and down the court, and you can lob alley-oops to him. He runs towards the rim. Jason Tatum's fast and athletic. Jaylen Brown, when he's healthy, fast and athletic. Marcus Smart, fast and athletic. But they just don't do it. It seems like they really just want to play in the half court and play this ISO ball and say, okay, Jason Tatum, bail us out. But that's a stupid way to play. And I know you're saying, Sap, the Lakers play with a lot of pace, but you can wear them down. If you can't just let them play offensively with pace, you need to make them work defensively. It's not a good defensive team. At least that's what the numbers show. And you played right into their hands by giving them rest on the defensive end.
They can be a good defensive team from time to time. The Lakers also, they're really deep, so they can bring in 5-6 legitimate NBA players. So they're not putting too many minutes on LeBron, Anthony Davis, or Russell Westbrook, who all played around 35, 36 minutes last night, which should be their max, so that they can use their bench, which is a deep bench. And that's including not having Trevor Ariza, who eventually will come back and be probably a good 3-and-D guy for them. But yeah, I mean, the Celtics, you would think that they'd be better in transition, at least push it a little bit more. I think Tatum could be exceptional in transition. I mean, we're talking about a 6'9" athletic guy who is a very good passer. Jason Tatum's a good decision maker, a good passer. Jaylen Brown's more of a finisher than a facilitator on the fast break. Again, with him not playing, you're playing with one hand tied behind your back. And it just got out of control. The Lakers were actually getting the ball in the paint, making shots, and then it's tough to run off of makes. I mean, that's the difficult part of it when you're giving up 117 points to the Lakers or 137 points to Utah. There's only so much running you can do when you have to wait till the ball goes through the net before you can get on offense. So that's part of it. That from the defensive end, if they're buttoned up, then they can work the transition game. But in 2 or 3 games in this West Coast trip, the defense just hasn't been there.
Yeah, and Sap, the offense had looked good the past 2 games and be like, okay, well, they figured something out. And then last night, 102 looks okay on paper, but then you realize a lot of it was in garbage time. The offense looked like crap for the most part last night, other than Jason Tatum, who, had a good game. I'm not knocking Tatum last night. He was efficient from the floor, 13 to 22, 5 of 7 from 3. He played fine. He just didn't get any help really from anybody else. And, Marcus Smart, who, I think is a terrific defender at times. He didn't play well defensively last night. Russell Westbrook was able to sort of do whatever he wanted in terms of driving to the basket. That's the sort of difficult thing with Westbrook is, yeah, you want to leave him open from 3, but if he decides not to take them, then you're suddenly giving him a lot of running room to run to the basket. So if you're playing way off of him and he decides smartly to not take a 3, suddenly he has a very easy lane to the basket, which you were seeing a lot last night.
Yeah, you saw a lot of him cutting to the basket ball. Ball. I think that could be a rule. They're both really good. And LeBron, I've always felt, could do even more off the ball, cutting to the basket. Obviously, if he's getting the ball 10, 12 feet from the basket with a head of steam, good luck trying to stop him. And Westbrook, as athletic as he is, can be in that same vein. So when those two guys play off each other, the Lakers are going to be that much better. I expect them to play better at this point, provided that LeBron is healthy. I mean, in the games he's played, they're 8-5, which is good, not great. He's averaging close to 35 points per game over his last 6. So he looks to be back to being a force. And I think Westbrook has shown that improvement. The big question mark for the Lakers is what's Anthony Davis going to do? Is he going to be a force? And he was on the boards last night, but offensively he has a tendency of kind of disappearing. And I think it's the right move to play him more in the low post, play him at the 5. He can still face the basket from 12 to 15 feet out. Totally eliminate him taking threes where he's shooting 19% from 3, which is just not acceptable. I mean, if you're a 19% 3-point shooter, don't take 3-point shots. That's just not a good idea. So I think once they kind of figure out what they want to do there, they'll be just fine. The Celtics need Jaylen Brown back. I mean, people would throw out, well, they're better without him because the ball moves better. But Jaylen Brown is a guy who can get you 25 points per game and is a good defensive player. And he can also get you some cheap baskets on the offensive boards or in transition. They need him back, but that's a difficult situation because you're talking about a hamstring. And that's one of those things where if he comes back too soon, that's just going to linger all season long. Do you just hold him until it's 100%? That could be Christmas by the time he comes back. And in the meantime, you're playing all these tough teams on the road, and then you've got Milwaukee and Golden State when you return from the trip. And next thing you know, you could be on the outside looking in, halfway through the season, and you've got a lot of ground to make up. So that's the big thing, is getting Jaylen Brown back healthy.
Yeah, obviously that's important. I don't buy into the fact that the Celtics are better without him. I think that's silly, obviously. Maybe the best version of the Celtics is trading Jaylen Brown and getting, an equivalent type of talent who plays a different position. Maybe that's a better version of the Celtics. But for now, with the roster that they have, obviously they're better when they have 2 all-stars as opposed to 1 all-star. So we'll have to see, what they look like. My suspicion is that they'll continue to just be this all year long, Sap, which is a 500 team hovering right at the 500 mark. Maybe they dip a game below. Maybe they go a game above, but for the most part, a 500 team. I don't think that they've shown they have the ability to go on any sort of lengthy win streak to be able to mitigate that sort of 500 thing. And again, this is the where you don't want to be in the NBA. And it seems like there's no sort of sense of urgency from management, coaching, or players to be in any other spot except for this, which is frustrating.
Yeah, it is, because they were a 500 team last year. And they made some moves in the offseason. Al Horford, I think, has been a nice addition. I think Dennis Schroeder's been a nice addition. But now you've dealt with Jaylen Brown being in and out of the lineup. I mean, if he's healthy, maybe they win 1 or 2 more games and they're in a slightly better spot than they're in right now. You got a new head coach who's trying to implement a different defensive system, which at times has worked, at times it hasn't worked. It just seems like they're going to be in that 7, 8, 9, 10 range, which gets them into the play-in tournament. If they win that, get into the postseason, and who you're playing in the first round is probably either Brooklyn or Milwaukee, and they're certainly not good enough to beat either one of those teams. And then you're back into the draft, mid first round. What the hell do you get there? And you've got two young stars that probably get a bit antsy at this point, wondering, is this long term that they can try to win a championship in Boston? Because let's not forget, Jaylen Brown is in his 6th year. Jason Tatum's in his 5th year. I mean, we talk about how young they are and how much they're going to continue to grow, but they've been around a while now. This isn't their 6th year for Brown, 5th year for Tatum. This is when they should be ascending, entering their prime, both as individuals and as the two best players on the team. And it just doesn't seem to be working to the point where we expect it to work, unless we're just overrating these two players and overrating the other players on the roster. And what they are is a 500 team.
Yeah, I do think that's what they are. And that's why I've been sort of calling for the Celtics to make a bold move. And continuing on this path, I just don't see that it's viable to compete for a championship. And that should be the only thing that's on the Celtics' mind, is how do we compete for a championship? Just continuing to play this out to its inevitable conclusion is one or both of those guys either choose to leave in free agency, or, okay, they stay here their whole careers and you keep winning, going to the first round and losing. So there's not a good scenario in terms of sticking with the status quo here for the Celtics. And so that's why I want them to pick some sort of direction, whether it's, making a bold move and trading one of those guys and seeing if that fixes things, or starting from scratch, which, isn't obviously something that you want to do, but at least it's picking a direction and trying to do something. This is the worst for me. I'd rather say, okay, we have a plan. We're going to bottom out and suck for a little while, but at least there's a plan in place than this, which is just being a 500 team is a misery.
Would you consider trading Jaylen Brown, which I think of the two superstars? I don't want to call them superstars. I use that term lightly, 2 stars, because they both made the All-Star team. I think they're outstanding players. I think Tatum is a top 15 player. I think Jaylen Brown's a top 25 player. So I don't consider them superstars, but they are stars. And look, any team in the league would be interested in them. We both agree that Tatum is the better player, has the higher upside. As we've said many times, if you could take Tatum and Brown and turn them into where you'd have a great player. Brown is probably a slightly better defender. He seems to be more of a competitor than Jason Tatum, but Jason Tatum has more natural ability. So if you look at moving Jaylen Brown, a deal to Portland for Damian Lillard, I mean, what would it take for that to happen? Would the Celtics have to add pieces to make the salaries work? What exactly would happen there? Now, you'd Brown, who is 6 years younger than Damian Lillard, and Lillard is having kind of an off year this year. Is that risky? Yeah, it's risky because you're getting a guy that's 6 years older, but you're also getting a guy who's a better player.
Right.
And then you roll with Tatum and Damian Lillard as your top 2 guys and see where you go from there. Yeah, I think if you just sit tight right now, you're going to be a 500 team, unless you get very lucky in the middle of the first round and find someone like Bam Adebayo or Tyler Hero, 2 players that Miami was able to draft in the middle of the first round. Meanwhile, you were drafting Aaron Nesmith and Romeo Langford, not necessarily in the same drafts, but you get my point. And those 2 guys are in and out of the lineup. We see them sometimes, and then there's some DNP CDs, which is frustrating. Whereas those 2 guys from Miami have contributed, even though Bam's going to be out a little bit with an injury. That to get lucky, you have to get in the middle of the first round, and that really is a crapshoot. So do you look and try to move Jaylen Brown for Damian Lillard? Whatever else would have to take place for that to happen, at least you're taking a shot there. That could work out great or could backfire.
Yeah, at the beginning of the season, Seb, if you asked me, I'd say no way. Now at this point, I do it depending on what the medicals are on Lillard. If he's fine in terms of it's just like these are just some nagging injuries that he's going to get over, then yeah, I probably do it, because at least it's maybe a shot in the arm, and it gives you something. And as good as Jaylen Brown is, and I think he's very good, I don't think he can be the best player on a team that has championship aspirations. I think Lillard, I don't know that he can, but at least he's closer to that. And him and Tatum pairing is a little less redundant than the Tatum and Brown pairing. So Yeah, I'd probably do it at this point, and I'm sure a lot of people would call me crazy because the age difference and those smaller guards like Lillard do break down. But I really believe it's time for a bold move, Sap, and that if that's the type of move that makes the team a little bit more energized, and even if it shortens your window a little bit, I'm okay with that because at least it's picking a direction and trying to swing for something. This you're just expecting a miracle to happen, and that's just not how the NBA works.
Yeah, the difference with Lillard and some of those other small guards, in my opinion, is that he's such an exceptional shooter that I think he can still have 3, 4, 5 really productive years. When you talk about the smaller guards, the hyper athletic guards, like say John Wall, who's actually 6'4", Russell Westbrook, who's 6'3", Rose, who's 6'2", Derrick Rose. They're exceptional athletes. I can't think of 3 guards that I've seen in the last 15 years that are as athletic as those 3. But those are the 3 that like stand out. Now I think you've got someone like Ja Morant is in that same breath, right? Just hyper athletic, can do so many things out there. Maybe not great outside shooters, but they get the job done because they're exceptional athletes. Dame, who is actually about 6 feet, 6'1", but he's such an exceptional shooter. I mean, you can make a case that after Steffi and Durant, he's the best shooter in the league, right? He's got unlimited range. The guy who has averaged 27, 28 points per game the last several years as a 6'1" guard, does a lot of his scoring from 3. He can have a decent 3, 4, 5 year run, which is all you should start to look at. I think what happens is with the green teamers, and not the classic green teamer, because you live in reality, but so many of the green teamers never want to trade any of these guys. It's like if you have to include Rob Williams in a trade, it's a no-go. Well, really? I mean, a guy who's averaged 19 minutes per game and has missed as many games as he's played the last 3 years, he can't be included in a trade. Like that's when I get turned off by green teamers. Or there's no way you can trade Marcus Smart because he's the heart and soul of the team. Well, what's that delivered you? So I think any player should be on the block if it's going to make you better, including Jason Tatum, who I believe obviously is their best player and should be your franchise player. But if you can improve by trading him, it's at that point you're probably in a rebuild, and now you're looking at draft picks, and that really is a crapshoot because if Jason Tatum goes to a team, and even if they're a middling team, what exactly are those draft picks worth? So they're in a really tough situation right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think, you're totally right about a lot of Celtics fans. Like, you can't trade this player, you can't trade that player. But the problem is, well, why not? Are you because suddenly, okay, if you're worse than this, then so what? You're going to lose in the first round anyways. Like, what's the big deal? Oh my God, we won't make the playoffs. Well, you're making the playoffs for 4 games. You're going to get swept by, Brooklyn or Milwaukee. So at this point, if it's a young team, I think there's a benefit of, okay, let's get them playoff experience. But this is a team that has a lot of veterans on it and guys who've been to the playoffs many times. Going to the playoffs and getting annihilated doesn't benefit the Celtics anything. It doesn't do anything for them.
No, not at all. I mean, Horford's in his 15th year. Schroeder's in his 8th year. I mean, he's a guy who should be contributing to a contending team. They thought that's what he was going to do last year with the Lakers. Tatum and Brown are right now entering their prime. Marcus Smart's in his 8th year. So, I mean, you've got players that in theory are right in their prime, or in the case of Al Horford, an older guy. So yeah, this is not a group of players in their second, third, and it's not Memphis or New Orleans where, okay, just wait for Zion to come back and lose 50 pounds. And now we've got our franchise player. This is a situation where you have what you have, and you should be at least better than they are. And again, it's tough in the East because they'd really have to hit the lottery to get into the class of Brooklyn and Milwaukee. And I think they'd have to make significant moves to even get in the class of Philadelphia or Miami. And I put Philadelphia in there because Philadelphia does have a piece that they can move eventually to get something in return, that being Ben Simmons. The Celtics don't have that. In fact, no team in the league has a player who doesn't play for them, but is still their property that they can move for assets. I mean, that's a pretty decent position for Philadelphia to be in, unless Daryl Morey is as stubborn as he seems to be and says he's not going to trade him for 4 years. He'll go through this process for 4 years, which to me is lunacy if he does. I don't think he's doing that. I think he's just using that as a bargaining chip. But at some point, Philadelphia can move Ben Simmons for something, and that will improve their team as well. So the Celtics, at their best are the 5th best team in the Eastern Conference, and at worst, the 9th or 10th best team in the Eastern Conference. Heck, I think I'd rather be the Charlotte Hornets right now than the Celtics. I really would, because I think LaMelo Ball maybe isn't as physically gifted as Jason Tatum, but I think he's a guy who is going to make players around him better. And 3 or 4 years from now, we're ranking the NBA players. LaMelo Ball may be above Jason Tatum, even though Jason Tatum will score more, but LaMelo will, be a better rebounder, better passer, and will improve those around him. So you can make a case the Charlotte Hornets are in a better position right now than the Celtics.
Well, I think with the Hornets, you can at least sell hope, okay, we're going to get better. We're going to improve, because you don't really know how good Ball can get, how good some of the other young pieces on the team, like Bridges, like the guy that took out of UConn, Book Knight, can get. Like maybe they could get really, really good organically, and it's suddenly a contending team. You can sell that and look forward to that. But with the Celtics now, Tatum and Brown have played enough, and these other guys have played enough where this is sort of the logical endpoint. Maybe they get a little bit better, but is Tatum or Brown going to get that much better to the point where suddenly the Celtics are a contending team? I find that extremely hard to believe. Yeah, from like a perspective of optimism, I'd rather be the Hornets. I don't know that their roster is better, but at least that they're building towards something. Maybe it ends up being in the exact same place the Celtics are, but for right now, at least you can have the optimism. For the Celtics, this is sort of the logical endpoint for about as good as the Tatum and Brown pairing by themselves can get. Unless they add a third star, why is there any reason to think this team is going to suddenly morph into a contending team? There's zero reason to think that, unless you're just completely delusional.
I would rather play with LaMelo Ball than Jason Tatum. If I'm a NBA player and they said pick one spot, to me, LaMelo Ball is a guy who could probably enhance my game more so than Jason Tatum could. That's just my opinion. And then you hear reports of, Jason Tatum, was more interested in how many points he scores than if the team wins or not. Where, again, LaMelo Ball, I don't know. But I give the kid a lot of credit, considering that, he's got kind of a crazy father who actually loves his kids and is always there for them. Maybe he was a bit too much of a helicopter parent, but nonetheless, was there to support his kids. But he kind of worked his way through that and has been even better than he's been. So than we expected him to be. So, yeah, I mean, if I'm a player and you're looking as Jason Tatum to be someone who recruits people, I would rather play with LaMelo Ball. Jason Tatum, to me, I still get the feeling that I don't know if he'll ever be. In fact, I'm pretty confident saying he'll never be an alpha. It's just not in him, right? I mean, and you can almost see that with like he plays so well against the Lakers, right? I mean, he had a huge game against the Lakers 2 weeks before last night against the Lakers. You almost get the feeling he's like, out there to impress LeBron James, to say, hey, LeBron, in a couple of years, maybe I'll come play with ULA. Like that. That's probably somewhere in the back of his mind, right? I mean, that's the way I think he's thinking. I don't know if he has the mentality being, okay, I'm Jason Tatum. I'm the best player in the Boston Celtics. I've got to go find, another player, whether it's in free agency, whatever the case may be. I've got to go recruit players. Kind of the way Kevin Durant's been able to do that with Brooklyn, right? Like, I don't know who went first. Was it Kyrie brought Durant, or did Durant bring Kyrie, whatever? But Durant did bring James Harden there, right? So you kind of get that feeling that that's what Durant can do in a very quiet measure. He's not a loud, boisterous guy, but he obviously can recruit. I don't even get the feeling that is Tatum the guy that's going to get on the phone in the offseason and say, hey, come play with us. I'm assuming Jimmy Butler reached out to Kyle Lowry in the offseason and said, hey, we got something good going here. Come join us. And it worked. I don't know if Jason Tatum's that personality.
Yeah, I don't really know either. And I do know, from just a page of Celtics history, it really took Paul Pierce saying, get me guys to play with or I'm out of here, to light the fire under Danny Ainge's ass in order for them to finally put together, the big three of Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett to go alongside with Paul Pierce. But that was Pierce sort of asserting his superstar, his star status, and leveraging his, potential free agency or trade desire and to make the Celtics do something. And I kind of hope Tatum does something like that. Because right now there seems to be absolutely no sense of urgency from the Celtics front office when it was Danny Ainge, or now that it's Brad Stevens. So I hope he does something like that, but I don't know that he's comfortable doing something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you may wake up one day and decide to be that type of personality. I doubt it. You are what you are. But yeah, Pierce was here, 9 years, and finally, at some point, help. I need help, and Danny Ainge went out and delivered, and they won a championship in that first year with the big three. So, is Tatum going to be that person? And exactly what do the Celtics have to give up, and who's that exact player that you can get here? It was kind of a perfect storm in the summer of 2007, right? You got the fifth pick in the draft. Um, you were able to the player in the flip or Ray Allen, and then you were able to put together a package of 7 players and draft picks to get Kevin Garnett, and it all worked. And again, the players were in a different place than they were now, because Pierce had got to the point like, look, I've made plenty of all-star teams. I've made money. I want to win now. With Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, they're still in that like formative stage, even though, again, this is Brown's 6th year and Tatum's 5th year. So it should be time to elevate to the next level where it's all about winning. But right now, they're kind of just sitting there on in limbo, which is kind of the worst place to be. Like you said, they're a 500 team, and they'll remain that unless they make some drastic moves.
Absolutely. That's, and that's the biggest frustration I have. And I feel like not enough Celtics fans have come to that realization. And to me, it's obvious. So I'm sort of waiting for other people to come to the same conclusion. But I think that's going to do it for us here today, Sap, on the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Next time, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Indiana with reports that the Pacers are going to blow things up. So when we talk next, we'll do some potential trade scenarios. They got 3 interesting players on the Pacers. So we'll shift our attention away from the Celtics for a little bit, though maybe they'll be involved in some sort of trade discussions. But lots of stuff going on around the league, but we always want to check in on the Celtics and the Lakers, especially when they play, and see what directions they're heading in. It seems like, to me, Sap, the Lakers, the compass is pointing up a little bit, Celtics down, or just not moving at all. So we'll have to see.
Sounds good to me.
All right, Sap. Thanks for listening, everybody. Again, you can find us anywhere podcasts are found. Just type in the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out our social media at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer. You can also check out the YouTube version of the show if you're not already. YouTube.com/Jet Stryer. We'll talk to you later, everybody. See ya.